Hey guys, what's up? I just wanted to quick share with you a cool little side project I have going here that's actually turning out pretty well. I'm expecting some mushrooms soon, hopefully, but what I did is I actually had a extra jar of Italian oyster grain spawn. So we had some of these lettuce containers in our recycle bin, and this was arugula, obviously, but there's a ton of food nowadays that comes in these plastic clamshells like this. So I figured, why not try and grow some mushrooms in it? So what I did is I took some aspen shavings and I pasteurized them like I usually do. I got some hot water up to 180 degrees, let them soak for about 90 minutes between that 180 to 160 mark for pasteurization, and then just laid the aspen shavings out on a table, let them cool and air dry for about an hour, and then I just packed them with the quart of Italian oyster grain spawn, which was wheat, and I mixed everything up and just packed it in this plastic clamshell right here. And for colonization, I just had this towel laying over top of it. I was a little worried that there wasn't going to be enough air exchange, just through the opening or whatever small gap there is in the lid of the clamshell there. So I actually got a nail and just got it really hot and just poked 4 little holes in the lid just to give it some extra air exchange. And our spawn run went really well here, whited up nice. So now I think it's probably ready to make mushrooms. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop the lid on the clamshell and just leave it like that, so it's just barely open, and that's going to give a nice shot of fresh air into the surface of the mycelium. But having the lid kind of near the surface is going to help maintain moisture as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into one of our clear plastic storage totes here with the holes drilled in the polyfill, and I'm going to put it in there until I start to see pins. Once I see some pinning, then I will move it over to the fruiting chamber. Because with oysters, as I mentioned before in my other videos, as soon as you start to see those pins, you have to get some fresh air to them. You can't leave them in a stifling environment like inside the storage tote, or else you're just going to get long, stringy oysters, which nobody wants that. We want nice, big, conch shell-shaped oysters. So that's what we're going for. So I'm going to sit these guys in here. And I just have my little mister with some distilled H2O. See, I have that properly labeled. And I'm just going to mist the inside of the tub a little bit and just leave that lid cracked on the clamshell. And we'll see what happens. I'll jump back in when we have some pins, but I figured this would be a cool way to, reuse something that's basically garbage. You could use this many times. When this was done, you could just dump the substrate out into your compost, wash this out, and use it again. I thought it would also be a cool gift to give somebody. I didn't bother peeling the label off, but if you took the label off and made somebody, it's almost like a nice little tabletop farm you could give somebody as a gift or something. But before I get too excited about it, let's see if we get some mushrooms. This Italian oyster is pretty aggressive. It's Pleurotus pulmonaris. In my experience, these don't need a cold shock. If this was a Oyster strain, I would definitely put it in the fridge right here overnight for a day or two and give it a nice cold shock, and then I would move it into this tub for pinning. But with pulmonaris, typically they just go for it on their own. So I'm just going to leave it in here, and we'll jump back in when we get some pins. Update time on our plastic clamshell here, guys. So we are getting some nice pins. Give you a close-up. See all those little baby oyster mushrooms popping off the surface there. So this guy is definitely ready to go in the fruiting chamber. I've just been leaving the lid like that, just barely open in the tub. But now that we're getting some pins, we definitely got to give it some more fresh air exchange, but keep the humidity high. So I have the fruiting chamber cranking over there with the visible mist. I have a bucket grow going as well. That's going to be chilling on the bottom shelf. That's actually the same strain, Pleurotus pulmonaris, there in a bucket. And we're going to put this guy here on the top shelf and let it fruit out. We'll see how it turns out. Update and picking time. I just pulled our clamshell full of aspen shavings out of the fruiting chamber here. You because I have to dry this out, clean it, disinfect it, and get ready for another big project I have going, which I'm also filming. But like I said, this was just a little side project. Some of my pins aborted, which I'm going to show you guys and talk about real quick here. If you guys don't have a lot of experience growing oysters, it's a good lesson there too. But we got a couple nice clusters of Italians here, which we are probably going to eat very shortly. These are really tasty. This Pleurotus pulmonaris Italian oyster strain. They're one of my favorite oysters to eat. Actually, I like them better than the Oyster strains. Just personal preference. But they have a really nice flavor, nice texture. So let's look at some of our other pins here. These guys over here are still looking kind of dark, so some of those may develop. Typically, your darker pins with this strain and most oyster strains are going to be the ones that are going to develop into nice fruit bodies for you. If you can see that cluster right there, see how the caps turned almost like a yellowish orange color? There's some more back in there. Those are aborts. Those have already aborted. They're done. You can just pick them off, get rid of them. They'll just continue to shrivel up and turn yellow. And if you don't get them, they'll eventually fuzz up. You can get some mold there. Not a great yield, honestly, with this size of a container, but I think it's really the substrate. I've been playing around with the aspen shavings on their own, and structure-wise, I think they're not ideal in terms of, you know, overall yield. They do work, but I think we would get better yields if we went with our pasteurized fuel pellets here and maybe just mixed a little aspen shavings in. But definitely get better yield with the pasteurized fuel pellets versus just going straight aspen shavings. But they are a nice additive, and like I said, this was just a fun little side experiment to see how this clamshell would do growing some oysters for us. And mission accomplished, even though we only got a couple nice clusters. But I'm just going to go ahead and toss this in the compost. I think you could definitely get a second flush out of this, but I'm not going to bother because I have a bunch of other projects I'm working on here that I'm trying to film for you guys too. So anyway, I'm going to call this quits here. You could reuse this container. As I mentioned before, I saved the lid. And these little clamshells, I was pretty impressed with how they did actually, you know, the spawn run, and how they did retaining moisture and promoting pinning and everything. So I think as a container, these work really well. I was impressed. And I would just change up the substrate. I wouldn't go straight aspen shavings. I would go with the pasteurized fuel pellets like I show in my other video. And maybe mix a little aspen shavings in, or just go straight fuel pellets. So I'm going to pick these guys off and cook them up. And as always, hit me up in comments, guys. Let me know what you think. And I'll do my best to get back to you. And I'll catch you next video.